Now, before we talk about birth control, let's define what birth control is. It is the voluntary regulation of the number of offspring, if any, and or the time they are conceived. So, in order to achieve birth control, we have to use contraception. There are different contraception methods out there. They vary in their degrees of how effective they are. So, let us find out what the options are. So, the first one is the coitus interruptus, which is the practice of withdrawing the penis from the vagina before ejaculation happens. And this method is not, as you would imagine, is not very successful either. There's a high failure rate where there is a failure to withdraw the penis before ejaculation. And even if that occurs, sometimes there are usually pre-ejaculatory secretions that come out of the penis, and those have sperms in them as well. So, sperms can leave the urethra before actually ejaculation happens. So that it's not a very effective method of birth control. Another method is known as the rhythm method, where there is total abstinence from sexual intercourse 2 days before and 1 day after ovulation. The thing to this is that in order to do this, the female has to have regular periods, documented regular periods. She has to follow her periods, and she has to document them, meaning that she knows exactly when they start, exactly when they end, and that is the only way she will figure out when ovulation occurs. Although there are signs of ovulation, for example, the change in the thickness and the amount of secretions, vaginal secretions. Sometimes there is a slight increase in body temperature that happens due to the effect of progesterone that rises after ovulation, but again, it is not a very effective way for contraception. There are mechanical barriers that pretty much just prevent the sperm from getting into the female tract. For example, condoms. And then there are chemical barriers known as spermicides. These spermicides kill sperms, but again, they're not very effective, especially if they're used on their own. So, usually, couples are advised to use chemical barriers in combination with something else, especially mechanicals. There's also combined hormone contraception, which would be the intake of both estrogen and progesterone to prevent pregnancy. When those hormones are taken, there's a disruption of the whole negative feedback on FSH and LH secretion levels, and that prevents the follicles from maturing, which eventually will prevent ovulation happening. It also thickens the cervical mucus. So when the mucus in the cervix becomes thicker, it's harder for the sperm to penetrate and to get to where the egg is. There are different ways of delivering these hormones. There could be oral contraception, there could be skin patches, there could also be intramuscular injection of high levels of medroxyprogesterone acetate, which is a kind of progesterone, and that prevents pregnancy for about 3 months. So every 3 months, the woman would have to get the intramuscular injection again. It also prevents the maturation and ovulation from occurring. IUD is introducing a small object inside of the uterine cavity. And so even if fertilization does occur, the IUD prevents implantation, which are pretty much two different things. So you will find that some of these methods prevent ovulation, some prevent fertilization, while others prevent implantation. Now, sterilization methods are another way for contraception. They are more permanent, although they are reversible. Vasectomy and Tubal Ligation. So a vasectomy would be to make an incision and to ligate the ends of the vas deferens. It has no effect on the testis, meaning that sperms are still being able to produce. They will just remain in the epididymis and in the more distal part of the vas deferens. And then as they die off, they are just going to be absorbed by the tissue and nothing really affects the testicular function. Again, it is a reversible surgery. The only thing is that as time goes by, fibrosis and scarring can happen, and that is why the reversibility of it sometimes is questionable. Tubal ligation would be cutting and ligating the fallopian tubes. Same thing about the reversibility of it applies here as well. In the next part, we will be discussing sexually transmitted infections.